Abigail Harrison, otherwise known to the public as Astronaut Abby, thanks for joining us on Air Sports News.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm going to go back to the beginning of your story in a minute, but first of all, because it's Air Sports News, we've got to mention the fact that you did a tandem skydive about a year ago.
Yes, I did. It was my first time skydiving.
And you've also got your PPL, your private pilot's license as well.
Indeed, and right now I'm working towards my instrument rating.
Wow, so we're going to come back to those two things at the end of this, but let's go back to the beginning when you were a 5-6-year-old girl and you decided you want to be an astronaut.
Yeah, so like you said, my story really starts when I was probably about 5 or 6 years old. Honestly, as early as I remember, I've always been fascinated and really, really passionate about space. And I always knew that I wanted to be a part of exploring all of the great unknowns out there. I'm not gonna lie, part of that passion was sparked by science fiction. Right. But as I got older, I realized that having grown up watching shows like Star Trek and all of that, that we're living in a time and an age where science fiction is a lot closer to reality than it's pretty much ever been before. So if you want to be exploring space or exploring the unknown, now is one of the best times to be doing that. And it's no longer a fictional thing. However, so that's basically part of where my inspiration came from. But I grew up knowing I wanted to explore space and to become an astronaut. And over the years, I did a lot of things to work towards that goal, even from a young age, including, like you mentioned, things like getting my private pilot's license, doing a little bit of skydiving, learning languages. So I've studied Mandarin, Chinese, and Russian to hopefully prepare myself for future missions that will hopefully be collaborative between multiple different countries. And then a lot of other things, including I graduated about a year ago from Wellesley College with a bachelor's degree in biology. But one of the things that I would say has to take a spot or a position when I tell my abbreviated story of my journey towards someday becoming an astronaut is founding my nonprofit, MarsGeneration.org. So the Mars Generation is a nonprofit that I co-founded about 4 years ago. And its goal is to excite and inspire people about space and about STEM, so that's science, tech, engineering, and math. And then furthermore, to provide resources and support to young people growing up today to make sure that they can be successful in those fields in the future. Because if we want to become the Mars generation, that is a generation that puts humans on the surface of Mars, hopefully this human, we have to be doing the work now to make sure that 10 or 15 years down the road from now, the people who are just kids right now, or who are teenagers, or who are young adults, are both being inspired and then also supported with the resources that they need to play a part and a role in the many, many fields and positions that will be required to make that kind of a great big leap for humanity. So founded the Mars Generation, and like I said, we're in our 4th year now. Yeah.
It's a great story, and there's many things I want to touch on. Your trip to Baikonur when you met Luca and got invited, we'll come to that in a minute. But something which is pressing right now, which is quite relevant, is Space Camp. And there's some things you were talking about online in the last few days about Space Camp. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so I'm really passionate about Space Camp. I went there when I was a kid or a teenager, and it was a really inspirational and transformative moment for me to get to finally meet other people my own age who were interested in the same things that I was interested in. And I know that it's had that same effect on hundreds of thousands, if not, I believe there's almost 1 million people who went to Space Camp over the last almost 40 years that it's been around. So it's really this incredible experience to have. But as many things have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, so is Space Camp. Space Camp in the United States Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, where Space Camp is housed, have really taken a hit and foresee continuing to take financial hits in the near future because of the pandemic. Because a lot of the income to Space Camp and the Rocket Center come from school groups and from camps and from international students and all of that, which they've had to, of course, put on hold and pause, and are going to be, as far as I'm aware, continuing to pause for up to a year. And depending on how the pandemic goes and how things turn out, it could be even longer. So they really found themselves in a position of potentially having to close down if they weren't able to find other ways, alternative methods to raise funds for that period of time. And they reached out to the public and the community and to all the people who had been so positively impacted by Space Camp. And over the last week, we're able to raise $1.5 million, actually over 1.5. Yeah, in 7 days to make sure that it's incredible. Yeah, and that's to make sure that Space Camp can keep its doors open in the future so that this really incredible and inspiring place and experience doesn't disappear and doesn't become another thing that ends up lost because of the difficult circumstances and situations that we're in right now. And Space Camp, like I said, it's near and dear to my heart, but it's also even more so near and dear to my heart that's one of the things that my nonprofit, the Mars Generation, does. One of our big programs is providing scholarships for students living at or below the national poverty line to go to Space Camp, to make sure that this is something that all kids can have access to and can have this opportunity that can be so amazing, despite not having the financial resources to do it on their own. And so my nonprofit has sent almost 50 students to Space Camp in the last 4 years. Wow. And we really hope to send more in the future. So it's good to see that they'll be open.
It's amazing. And your story is quite an incredible story. Your first step into fundraising was to get yourself to Balkanor to see Luca's launch, which was an incredible amount. You needed to raise $35,000. Tell me how that got going.
Yeah, so I guess I should step back a little bit and explain why I was going to Kazakhstan and who astronaut Luca is and how I knew him. So when I was about 13 years old, my mom was able to take me down to Florida to watch the second to last launch of the space shuttle, because it was something that she knew how passionate I was about space, and she realized that this was a historic moment, that this was something that was going to be disappearing from our ability to experience it, and it was soon going to become a part of history, but right now we had that chance to experience it in real time. So she decided, this is important, we're gonna go try and do this. We went down, we watched the launch, which was incredible for a young space nerd to get to see a launch firsthand, especially since I grew up in Minnesota, which is a little bit of, it's both landlocked and space locked. You don't have a whole lot of exposure to space type things there. So this was kind of an out of this world experience to start out with. But it was made even more incredible by someone that I met when I was in the airport on the way back from that launch, which was astronaut Luca Parmitano, an astronaut with the European Space Agency. And I actually ran into him by mistake in the security line going through TSA. I saw him, a couple people ahead of me, and recognized him. And once we were through security, went up and approached him and asked if I could interview him. And he was really, really considerate and kind with his time, and ended up sitting down with me for about an hour and just giving me all kinds of advice. And no need to do that. Not in his job purview. He took time out of his life. It was such an act of kindness and generosity towards the next generation. But we got to sit down and talk for about an hour, and I got lots of advice and was able to ask him questions. And at the end of that, he gave me his email address and said, if you have any more questions, you can send me an email. I will be your astronaut. And he held true to that statement for years afterwards, serving in a role of inspiring me and being a mentor and really giving me a lot of belief and confidence in my ability to chase after this incredibly difficult dream that he'd already achieved. And a couple of years later, when he was slotted for a mission to the International Space Station to launch from Baikonur, Kazakhstan, he invited me to come watch his launch. and furthermore asked me, we decided to partner up. I would be his Earth liaison while he was in space, to share his experiences living and working in space with people here on Earth. That was something that had never been done before. An astronaut not only partnering with a civilian, but partnering with a teenager, to be able to try and like reach out to different groups and in different ways to make the experience and the excitement of space more accessible and more widely experienced. And the very first step of that was, of course, going to Baikonur to watch his launch. So like you said, I had my first foray into fundraising then, where I raised about $35,000 to go and do that and to share that experience through video and through social media and through writing with people all around the world. And then got to spend the 6 months after that doing a lot of sharing of his time and space with people as well.
It's a great story, and right now you're producing lots of YouTube content. Is this a full-time operation for you now? The Astronaut project?
Yeah, so it feels like it for sure. Working with the Mars generation definitely ebbs and flows in how much work there is, but lately it's been spending a lot of time doing that because I recognized that, or we at the Mars generation, it wasn't just me, the Mars generation as a whole recognized that the kinds of resources that we produce are even more important now than they've ever been before, because a lot of our resources and a lot of our work is digital and through digital content. We do a lot of social media, we do a lot of creating resources for teachers and for parents and for students. And now that there's such a need for that, we decided that we were gonna try and do our part to fulfill that need. So like you just said, one of the things that when schools first were starting to shut down, not just in the United States where I'm based, but all around the world really, we put out a call to teachers and students and said, if you have any questions about space, you can send them in and we will go ahead and we'll make a personalized video for your class that you can share with them and use as a way to still have special, important, inspiring, engaging lessons and moments, even though you can't be with your class in person anymore. And we ended up making a couple dozen videos that had questions ranging all the way from like things about aliens and about black holes, over to things about how do astronauts, what do they do if they get sick in space, or what is medical care like in space, and things like that that seem even more pertinent right now than ever before. So yeah, it's been very busy lately. The pandemic has given us a lot to work on and to try and make things easier for people in the space and STEM communities during this difficult time.
And since you started with your partners with the Mars generation, which stands out in your mind as having the most emotional impact? Which event during it stopped you in your tracks?
Wow, so there's been a lot of them for sure. It's an incredibly emotional and touching thing, I suppose, to build something that you feel so connected to, and then to see it grow and succeed, and to see it 4 years later still be growing and doing so much good. When it started out, we weren't sure quite how, what direction we were going or any of those kinds of things. It was just, we knew we wanted to do something good. We wanted to share with other people the good luck and fortune that I've had to have a lot of these space experiences and exposures. But if I had to pick like one moment that I think was the most incredible or emotional to me, it was the first year that we were able to offer space camp scholarships, and we got all of the pictures from our campers, our scholars who were at camp that week back, and just saw these looks of joy in their eyes. And one of the reasons why that stays with me as this incredibly touching moment is because when I went to space camp as a teenager, I actually went on a partial scholarship my first time as well, because my mom was a single mom who had 2 kids and was working as a high school teacher. So money was a little bit tight sometimes, and there was a nonprofit that was able to help me go to space camp. And then less than 10 years later, I was in the position of helping other students also go to space camp. And so to see that kind of come full circle was incredibly touching and emotional to me.
Brilliant, what a great story. And getting your PPL, getting your pilot's license, how did that seem to you? Was it a challenge, or did you just feel like it was a movement through the process?
So I would say that getting my PPL was something of a challenge, and I think that the reason for it is because of how I chose to do it. So we can all look back at the past and say things like hindsight or 2020, and that sounds like a cliche, but in a lot of cases it is true. And for me, that was accurate, because what I ended up choosing to do my private pilot's license at the same time that I was going to college. But I was doing those in two different parts of the country. So I was going to college full-time on the East Coast, and I was doing my private pilot's license in Minnesota because I didn't have a car or access to an airport or anything like that when I was at college. I was locked to my campus. And so it was every time that I would come home for breaks or winter term or things like that, I would spend my entire time home just flying nonstop, which meant that it took me about a year to get my PPL done. And that's not, in my opinion, the optimal way to do that, because you end up, we all know that you either use it or lose it, and that counts for flying as well, both for the knowledge and the actual skills that your body remembers. And if you go months in between without flying and without doing that, it doesn't matter how much chair flying you're doing or how much studying you're doing or things like that, you end up starting to lose some of it and have to redo the same things every time you come back to get back into the swing of things. So I found that to be the most difficult part of my private pilot's license, was just having it spread out over such a long period of time. But other than that, I thought that it's one of my biggest prides after the Mars generation is knowing that I'm a pilot.
Fantastic. And skydiving, do you think we'll get you back in the air again with a parachute?
Oh, absolutely. That's something that's high on my list of things that I'm interested in doing again.
Excellent.
Sure.
Good stuff. And so working towards your goal as being one of the first people on Mars, what's the next step for you, Abby? What do you need to do next?
Yeah, so the next step, I've had to reevaluate that for myself, because after college, I spent about a year working on the Mars generation, trying to make sure to drive it to the direction and the place that we wanted it to be in the future. I also spent some time working in Wyoming with a nonprofit there called Wyoming Stargazing, where I was doing place-based learning to help expose people to space through the incredibly clear and beautiful night skies of Wyoming. And then a couple other things, I spent some time writing a book with Penguin Publishers that'll be coming out in 2021, and a variety of other things. But for me, I had a big plan, which was I was going to do a bucket list item of mine.
Right.
I was planning to do the Trans-Siberian Railroad through Russia and then pop over into China as well and do some of that as well. So I was going to spend about 3 months trying to backpack my way around those countries. Having spoken Russian and also Mandarin Chinese, those were areas that I've always wanted to travel more in and revisit and really learn more about the culture and spend time there. Of course, those plans have been put on hold because of COVID and the pandemic. But the next year for me, I'll hopefully be doing applying to grad schools and PhD programs, potentially working in a lab, and of course continuing the work that I'm doing with the Mars generation.
Well, we wish you all the best. That's a great place to leave it. Astronaut Abby, we really, really have our fingers crossed for you and hope you make it there one day.
Thank you so much. I appreciate getting the opportunity to share my story and the importance of space camp with you today.